Welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, the official podcast of Ryan Johnson Ministries. This podcast was created for the purpose of equipping others for the advancement of the kingdom of God. We hope that you enjoy this episode and encourage you to subscribe to the Blacksmith Chronicles today. For more information about Ryan Johnson Ministries, please visit www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us.
Hey guys, welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. This week, I am so excited to have this guest on. Now, let me go with everyone that is about to listen or watch this particular episode. This is going to be a real topic. This is going to be what is facing so many families, individuals, especially children in this hour, this nation, and of course, other nations of the world, but we want to highlight what's happening here in this nation. There's going to be adult talk. There's going to be some things that could potentially make you uncomfortable, but it's not to embarrass anyone. It's not to discredit anyone. It is to be real for what is happening right now, from sex trafficking to child trafficking to the exploitation that we're seeing among our school systems and much, much more. So you've been warned, and I love you all. But this is a serious topic, and especially those that are in the body of Christ, we need to address as well. This is not simply a political problem. It's not a political agenda. It is a national issue, and we that are a part of the body of Christ stand up and do our part. We cannot wait on a federal government to do it for us. So you've been warned, and I hope you'll continue listening. Without further ado, I want to welcome this week's guest to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, Ms. Landon Starbuck. Landon, thank you so much for joining the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's truly a pleasure to be here.
I've been following your work for a while. I was introduced to it through mutual connections and really admire your heart for what you're doing. It's a broad range of things that we can't narrow everything down to one thing because of what you're fighting for our children, for women, even for men and families, and so much more. But for those that may not know who Landon is, kind of give me a little bit of behind the scenes of who you are so that our guests will be able to know, oh, yes, this is who that is.
Well, my name's Landon Starbuck. I'm a mom of 3. I'm a wife to Robbie Starbuck, and I'm a Christ follower, and I love the Lord, and I love to serve him. And one of the ways that my life changed was I left the music industry as a Billboard charting artist to get involved in the fight against sex trafficking, but really my heart was pulled towards the children and focusing on them. And I ultimately started my own nonprofit, Freedom Forever, to combat the sexual exploitation and all exploitive forms of children. And so one of the reasons that I did that is because I have 3 kids of my own, and I see the trajectory of this country, where it's headed, where it's going, and the fact that our culture has changed so much, where children are no longer valued and protected. And that is my calling. I'll do this as long as I'm here, as long as I have breath in my lungs, and pull other people into this fight so that we can fight effectively. And the knowledge that I have and the experience that I have, I can educate and train up other warriors for children.
So here's the thing. There's a lot of things that are happening right now, and it feels like it is amped up to another level that is just mind-boggling to me. I think back sitting at a restaurant table having lunch with a bunch of gentlemen talking about what was going to happen with Y2K, and was the world going to come crashing in. I remember having this conversation thinking, you know, the Bible talks about the tickling of the ears. Now and I was like, there's no way. And now you fast forward to here we are in 2022, and we're beyond that in a lot of realms. And we're seeing things that are happening at the expense of our children. There's so many things that is being just, I'll say it this way, crammed down their throats. But it seems like it is coming at a rapid pace towards the young age of children, the pre-K, the kindergarten, the first grade, the second grade. So here's what I want to ask you. Have you, when you started this work, the years ago to where you are now, is it true? Has there been a significant increase for the exploitation of our younger children that we're sending to school or part of library programs or whatever the case may be? Has it truly increased?
The demand to exploit children, to harm children, has never been greater in our lifetimes.
You know, this is what fascinates me, because I think there's a lot of people, they will say, okay, maybe we're just getting more knowledge of what is going on. But if we go to the school systems, if we go and look at the books and we look at the material that is happening, it is, I'm trying to use my word correctly. It is like it's in every single topic to try to put some kind of perversion or sexual identity. We have children that are 5, 6 years old that is saying, you know, I want to change my gender. I believe, you know, I was born a boy, but I believe I was really born a girl, or vice versa, and so on and so forth. And now we have this influx of it would, for all intents and purposes, it would feel like that we're taking what typically would have been in a gentleman's club environment, and now we're putting men in women's clothing, and we're having dances at libraries and outdoor events and cities and parties. And we are seeing little kids with money come up and put that into the attire that is in these full-grown men and such. I'm confused at how our culture has become so adaptive to that. Do you have any kind of information that is showing why there's such a push and a reception from many parents that is just like, it's not that big of a deal?
Well, I think that this is psychological and spiritual warfare that we're dealing with. And I think the hardest part is for people to wrap their heads around this problem, because there's so many tentacles going in different directions, and there is a war on children. And from every aspect, I mean, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around. Imagine being a child. You know, there's schools not safe, devices aren't safe, games aren't safe, friendships aren't safe, even siblings aren't safe necessarily if they're exposed to some of the sexual content. I mean, we're talking about an entire war on children, psychological warfare, the spiritual warfare that's going on. And there's so many nefarious entities that benefit from the harm of children, the harm of everything going on. But ultimately, you know, we know as believers that this is the enemy, and this is how he operates, and he creates chaos and confusion and destruction wherever he can, however he can. We also know that he masquerades, you know, as an angel of light and all of these things. And that's why we fell for so many of these lies, where inclusivity and tolerance and kindness and the rainbow and unicorns and all of these things, these imageries that they use to even seduce children, to solicit children into this movement. But ultimately, what's really hard to admit, you know, and to confess to, is that we have abdicated our role as parents, and God calls us to this role specifically. He calls us to be parents, to train them up a certain way with his values and morals. And I think what people are learning, and ironically, it's taken this hyper exposure of evil to recognize that the enemy is real. And if he's real, God is real, and God is powerful. Because if Satan was that powerful, all of this would have been destroyed. All children's innocence would have been lost. But there's good people fighting, and they're stirring in their hearts, recognizing there is a spiritual battle going on, and it requires our participation. So the reason we got here is because parents abdicated their role. God was taken out of our communities, our homes, our schools, and replaced with this pseudo ideology, this pseudo spirituality that made us feel good. But it was superficial, it was short-lived, and it turned out to be a Trojan horse in so many ways. So we're reckoning with what we also created ourselves. And so that's calling us to really do an inventory of our lives, to spiritually examine ourselves. And I think that it's hard for some people to do that. It doesn't feel good. But the other side of that is power. It's walking in that power and that authority that Christ gives us. And I think that there is another side of that for people who are still scared, or are still just so overwhelmed, and they're almost living in a trauma mode of just trying to survive because they can't hear another awful story. They cannot see another video from a drag show. They cannot hear about another child being harmed. And so they kind of put their head in the sand. I think that we're seeing that the church do that too. But there's also another side of that, and that is warriors listening to this podcast right now, this message right now, and they are having a stirring in their hearts, and they are being called to step up into the full authority that we're called to step into to fight this battle. And if we do that, we will win.
And this is where I really appreciate what you're doing, because I watched you keep up with individuals like Michael Knowles, or even Tucker Carlson has had some information on this. Candace Owens, Matt Walsh, you just recently was a part of the thing there Matt Walsh did in Nashville concerning going back to everything that Vanderbilt University was a part of and such. And I watched so much of those highlights and those clips in that. And here you are, you're speaking, and people are protesting what Matt Walsh is doing. And there's always this anger there. And I'm not trying to just, kind of make this a blanket statement, but a lot from a very liberal agenda seems very aggressive in their anger. Whereas those that would fight for are against sexual trafficking, for the exploitation of our children and such, it feels like, now, Landon, I may be completely wrong on this, but it feels like there's not even any amount of anger within those that would stand up for our children or men and women that might be caught in sexual trafficking or whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying that we turn around and be like the liberal agenda, screaming, hollering, getting people's face, but I don't know why it feels like, from my point of view, it feels like there's not enough people bothered by this. I watched a video. Okay. There was a drag show that had happened in Chattanooga. I was born and raised just an hour south of Chattanooga. I'm just a couple hours from Chattanooga, Tennessee now. And it was explicit, to say the least, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happens in Chattanooga. Thereafter, I watched another clip of a mocking of a drag show, mocking of Christianity at Tennessee Tech University. And it just, I'm like, unreal. And we're seeing this put in churches. We're seeing this in coffee shops, libraries, and just parades and so on and so forth. But I genuinely hear you say we have to step up and start combating this. We have to stand up and make our voices heard. But when you have an agenda that is very liberal and they're screaming and yelling, what are some things that us on this right side of this can do without becoming like that liberal-minded screamer yelling at the top of our lungs? What are some practical things that we can do to combat what is happening really and truthfully to our children?
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up those videos, because that is, what we can do. Both my husband and I worked to put out both of those videos that went viral and expose what's happening in this state. And that, created a chain reaction of events that ultimately is resulting in, our leaders paying attention, our political leaders to act. And that is really how they work. For people who don't understand politics, they will not answer to the people unless the people demand that they answer to them. And the change begins with us and looking out for our own homes, into our own communities, into our own houses of worship, and extended further. And what I see is an inaction at that cellular level in the home, right? So some people say, oh, we're Christian, we do this, and then they give their kids, this. And this is a smart device with porn, pedophiles, social media that grooms them. It's essentially a grooming device. And there's a disconnect there, because having a kid having a smartphone puts them at exponentially, significantly more risk of being exploited online, sextortion, being groomed, being abused. And there's a disconnect there. So how we live our lives when we show up to church, how we live our lives in our community, and what we say that we stand for, we are doing the opposite. And I'm not saying everyone, and I'm not trying to blame and shame, but I'm trying to encourage people to see that micro lens into our lives, to look at our own lives and see everything from how we spend our money. Because some people don't even realize, when we go to Starbucks, we're supporting Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is behind this global push to sexualize our children, to essentially give them their own sexual rights, to give them their rights to access information. What do they mean by that? They mean that kids will have access to internet as a fundamental human right. That is what they're pushing for. They're pushing to take away parental rights. They're pushing to limit our religious liberties, what goes in our bodies. All of these things are happening, and it requires a radical resistance, a radical assault on our values, on our faith, on our children, on our families, requires a radical resistance. And that doesn't mean we adopt an attitude of just antagonistic anger, hate, violence, any of that. It means that we stand up and really walk in what we say we stand for. So, what's the point of having morals if we are afraid to stand for them? What's the point of having faith in all of this if, when it comes down to it, our own children, we're willing to subject them to these exploitive environments? So, I really think that the path forward is to examine our own lives, take an inventory, where we spend our money, what environments we put our kids into, whether or not we make the choice to give them a smartphone versus a gab phone before they are ready and equipped to handle the nature of what that means. Those are some of the big things that we can do just to, number one, protect our children and our community and our environments. But then when you start seeing the enemy infiltrate, when you start seeing the hypersexualization affect our Christmas parades, our traditions, all of that is a coordinated assault. There's a reason that they go into red states and do this. And I know that a lot of Christians especially are very reticent to use politically divisive language to engage in uncomfortable conversations, because we've been conditioned as Christians to value peace and conformity over morality. And this is the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway, the biggest lesson I've been learning in my life, is that is how they were able to deceive the entire, faith community in America, is by valuing peace. And if we value peace over morality, of doing what's right, of saying what's right, of speaking truth, then we find ourselves making deals with the devil on a daily basis. With the pronouns, we are admitting a lie. We are legitimizing an ideology that is not science-based. It's not truth. It's not accurate. It is harmful. It's toxic. It's resulting in these young girls chopping off their breasts, their healthy breasts, at 15, 13 in some states. So we are contributing to that lie because we want to make peace, because we don't want to ruffle feathers, because we don't want to have those difficult conversations, because we don't want to show up at our libraries and confront our librarians about the pornography that's in there. We don't want to confront our pastors. We don't want to confront the school when they're having inappropriate conversations, teaching our kids to keep secrets, injecting comprehensive sex ed. That is really what it comes down to. So the best thing we can do, the activism that we can do, is look at what's happening in our homes, then look at what's happening in our churches and our communities, and make change there. Because if we can't insulate and protect our bubble of what we live in, we have no chance of affecting Washington or our national standards.
I really love what you just said there about valuing peace more than morals. And that, to me, because one of the things I've said is there's a vast difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. And a lot of times people are willing to do whatever they can to maintain and keep peace, but that often entails keeping our head in the sand. I watched a video, gosh, I went blank on what state that I want to say it was Oregon, but I may be wrong about this state, and I apologize if I am wrong about that. But a parent went to the school board, and he started reading excerpts out of this book that is in the children's library, and it is talking about doing a sexual act, a boy to a girl, and it's very, very vulgar. I will not repeat it, but the dad read it to the school board, and they had passed for it to be into the system. And I genuinely, I think one of the things that would be helpful, and Landon, correct me here, that we can't turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to some of this information that is being made public to us, such as yourself and many others who are putting the videos out there, the content out there, the information out there. We can't get in the habit to where we just allow that stuff to kind of pass by and go, well, it's great that they're doing that. This is, I'm a parent, I have 4 children. Other people, you may not even be a parent right now, but you will one day, or you're raising spiritual kids in that manner. We got to fight for this. This is what I wanted to share, Landon, that I had a conversation a few months ago with George Barna of the Barna Research Group. And he he gave me some information that just blew me away. He asked me the simple question. He said, what do you think the average age to, teach a child something and they'll remember it for the rest of their life? They'll be this way for the rest of their life. What do you think the average age bracket is? And he ended up telling me it was from age 2 to age 7, that whatever you teach and instill in a child between the ages of 2 and 7, they'll forever believe that for the rest of their life. That'll be something that'll be grounded in them. When I heard that, I immediately went, that's the agenda that is happening right now. That's why they're going after the younger kids. That's why they're trying to get that instilled, because you can radically change an entire generation with this. But I know there's people that's listening to this episode or they're watching this podcast and they may say, I get it. I want you, if you can, I don't know if you can rattle off some of this information. What are just some common things that most people don't understand what is happening at the expense of our children? Maybe it's how many books are getting in or how many programs are actually happening across the nation. What's something that is very alarming that most parents just simply do not know that is happening to influence their children right now?
Okay, so I wish I had a diagram. I'm going to draw one out at some point to connect these dots. But, our public government-run education institution, and it's not just public schools, it's independent schools, NAIS, which is the National Association for Independent Schools. It's even private schools. This ideology, it's Marxist rooted. Some people say it's neo-Marxist, but it is evil. And what I mean by that is that they fundamentally believe that children's innocence is a product of what they call cis heteronormative patriarchy or sexuality or the nuclear family. And this is why that I make the Marxist reference, is because in order to control people, you have to destroy the nuclear family, because it is the strongest force stopping any evil agenda. And it's the strongest force guarding the individual, our sovereign God-given rights. And so these, there's been many entities that stand to profit or benefit off of American division. Let's just talk about America right now, the nuclear family dividing in America. I mean, we have China literally open about their 100-year plan, about their, they make plans to destroy America. And they say that it can happen without firing a single shot. There's been so many, revolutionaries, quote unquote, authoritarians that have admitted to this plan. It's not some secret. And then we have global organizations that dictate the national and even global standards of sexual health and human rights. So we're talking about the very top of the entire world, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the Planned Parenthood Federation internationally, PPFI. We're talking about all of them getting together in their groups, and we are disconnected from it. Our media doesn't want us to know. We're never informed about what actually happens at these meetings. And they come up with these Bill of Rights, these new human rights. They're always modifying it. That's how we got in the situation where in America, abortion became healthcare and a human right, healthcare right? Because if it's healthcare, then it becomes, more of a human right territory of denying somebody care, right, based on discrimination. And that's where then our laws start to change. So we didn't know this till the laws started to change in our country. So we have the national education standards changing. We have our laws changing. We have kids now being able to consent in places like California and now Virginia and Chicago, at 12 years old, to medical procedures. And this is the point I consistently make. If they can get kids to consent to life-altering, irreversible, in some cases, sexual changes and identity changes, and they can subvert a child's identity, the way that the values at home, everything, what else can they consent to? And this brings us to, a pedophile agenda. And the reality is going back to what I just said, this is ideological. If people believe, which they do, these academics, there's no shortage of evidence, these academics at these institutions like Johns Hopkins, the Kinsey Institute in Indiana, Dr. Alfred Kinsey, he's the father of this sexual research that preempted the sexual revolution in America, Hugh Hefner, all of the distortion of our sexual ideas and the subversion of Judeo-Christian values around morality and sexuality. That was subverted. That was by his work. And he is the father. His research substantiates all of this radical gender theory and sexual theory. But his research was that of a prolific pedophile who abused children very young. I won't go into the horrors of that, but please, I would encourage listeners to know who he is, know about his research, know about Dr. John Money, and the reason that these ideas took hold in, America. That saying, as we've all learned from COVID, trust the experts, trust the science. There's a reason they pushed that, because Dr. Alfred Kinsey was an expert. He was also the lead researcher, the most revered researcher. They just erected a statue of him at Indiana University. So this ideology, they use his work to substantiate all of these other ideologies, which they're deeply intertwined, the gender and the radical sex ed theory. But it connects to the global, dictates about our human rights and where they're going. And when abortion becomes a human right, and then kids then get sexual rights because they believe, again, that kids are sexual from birth. Why do they believe that? Work of Kinsey, the work of these prolific researcher pedophiles who have to this day not been discredited and to this day are still hailed and praised. So there's a lot of work that we have to do to discredit researchers like that and call them out as the prolific pedophiles that they are. But it's also to understand that these control mechanisms from the top down, they dictate the standards. So we can kick and scream and we can fight. And in areas where, you can make a difference and parents are willing to stand up, I say fight for your community no matter what. But we also have to be realistic and understand that this has been years, decades in the making for them to get to this point. And sometimes it starts feeling like a game of whack-a-mole where you get rid of one book and everybody's like, yay, we got rid of this pornographic book in the library. And then another one pops up. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute. They just push paper, you fill out a form, and then they do it again. And you don't actually make real change. And in the meantime, how many kids are being exploited? How many kids are being, exposed to this content in schools and libraries? These people know what they're doing. This is ideologically motivated. And so we really have to understand the depths and the manipulations and calculations that go on behind this agenda so we can be smarter. If we don't know the enemy, then we don't know how to combat it effectively at all. So it's understanding the reality of the situation and how to fight effectively, because if we don't fight effectively, we burn out and then our heads go back in the sand like an ostrich because it's too much. It's overwhelming.
Absolutely. And, here's one of the things I think that we're definitely going to deal with in our region. We both live in the state of Tennessee. We're in the Bible Belt, and I think there are many individuals, especially in the Deep South. And I don't mean this to be insulting, but a lot of times we can be easily naive. And we think that these things are simply occurring like in California or New York City or whatever, Miami, some liberal influx of a liberal agenda and stuff. That it may not be happening in Texas, but it's happening in Austin. And I think we would be very, very surprised to learn that it is not simply a liberal city or a blue state, that this is a massive agenda across the board impacting every state in the United States. And it is why it's so important for us to be able to not only get involved in our children's lives, but find out what's happening in our own communities. There's a town not far from where I live. They were having one of those events not long ago, and a local church there really worked hard to combat it, and they were successful. And they shut it down. And it does, I think, a lot of times, kind of what you mentioned, it feels like a small victory because, just like you said, you get one book removed, another one gets replaced in. And this is going to take a long battle for us to be able to, and I say this with the not ill intention, but wage war against what is happening here. But here's the thing, Landon, I think there's, anytime that I go down this road with people, I always get into this conversation with individuals that's like, well, I just don't think it is bad as what it is. You talk about the media is controlling us, or the media is hiding things from us, or the government is, working this way and that. And of course, if you look and see what Google censors or YouTube censors or other people, you will kind of get a clearer understanding. But most of the world, for example, you talk about child sex trafficking for that matter even. And I think automatically of Jeffrey Epstein, who was a pedophile on every level that you could possibly imagine. But here's this guy that gets away with, for however many years he gets away with it. His partner in crime and all this has been arrested, has been, sentenced to jail, but we have no name, not one single name out of that black book. We have no information that is happening. Now, meanwhile, and I'm not saying this is apples to apples, but you have someone like Kanye West who, wears a t-shirt that causes a lot of controversy. He loses his sponsorship in Adidas. He loses his sponsorship in the Gap. Banks are refusing to take his money and stuff. And it makes you take a step back and go, what is really going on? Now, again, I think we have to educate ourselves in such a way that we're going to become so uncomfortable with this. But I do want to know from your experience with those individuals, who are some of those people that are fighting for our children? I know yourself and the work that you guys are doing. I know, Matt Walsh is obviously doing that, but are there politicians out there that are fighting that we may not be aware of, that somebody may be listening and watching this that lives in California or wherever, and they're surprised to find out someone in their state? Can you give us any identity to an organization or name or politicians that is actually standing up for the sake of our children?
Wow. Well, that was a tough one, Ryan. So here's the thing. I know a lot of good people that we are working with behind the scenes, but until they actually do the work that needs to be done and we get the results that children deserve, that we deserve as constituents, I am reticent to call their name out and to applaud them or to give them that credit. They need to earn it. And it's really important part of this whole process to hold these people accountable and to write letters, to let them know, to show up, to ask difficult questions, because they serve us and we forget. And sometimes we treat them like little, demagogues or idols where they're just untouchable. And we think that, our voice doesn't make a difference, but we actually, enable that power dynamic by not holding these people accountable. This should have never happened in our state. Never. We are conservative, Bible Belt, family, beautiful family culture here. That's why I came here. That's why so many people came here and are continuing to come. And if we don't do the work to preserve our culture, Tennessee will fall into the pits of California and any other state, and it may not happen as quickly as some other ones, some of the purple states, but it will happen. And we have to know where our politicians stand and hold them accountable to it. We have to understand why weren't certain legislations being enacted or prioritized when we knew this was a threat to the state. And it's not just to, hold people's feet to the fire, but it's to let them know that we are paying attention. We are engaged. This is what has to change. Until you and I and everyone we know are involved, paying attention. That doesn't mean we have to become, political and, door knocking for people and all of that. Because I understand, trust me, out of anyone, after what happened to my husband, I don't enjoy politics one bit. But they've gotten to this point because good people have not been involved and the not good people have been involved. That's why we're at this point. So nobody likes politics, but politics are an extension of our values. And in fact, it's very theological, because everything that happens in Washington, everything that happens at the state level is a product of people's demand of what we want and what we don't want, and on the issues that we will just not stand for it. And I've seen people, go and protest for things, like gas and things like of that nature, or, the roads or the stadiums and things like that. But when it comes to our children, we've been working at this a long time, long before the recent big rally, which was amazing that so many people turned out. We want to see more of that. But what motivates people to get up off their couch or to get out of the prayer closet? Prayer is powerful. But when we get cancer, we don't just pray it away. When our child is bullied at school, we don't just pray it away. We show up and say, hey, what's happening here? It's not okay. Hey, how can we treat this? We act. If things are important to us, we act. And that is what has to change. So sorry, I don't know what tangent I was going off on there, but I just want to encourage people. This is where the rubber meets the road, is they are afraid of us. If we show up in droves and demand accountability, if we show up at our libraries, groups of mothers, church gatherings, and we hold them accountable, things will change. They will start paying attention. There needs to be a healthy fear and reverence and respect given back to the people.
Yeah, first of all, let me just say, this is why I love what you're doing. The fact that you said, I don't know that I can name one, because they need to prove it. They need to show up and prove it. I love that. I love the rawness of that. I love the authenticity of that, to say, okay, on a political landscape, you guys got to show up, and you can't give me the cheap talk. And you got to come through, and you really got to fight on this. So I love that you shared that, because I think that's so important for people to understand. I mean, I was having a conversation with my wife not long ago concerning something about the school system and stuff. 2 of my kids are out of school. 2 of them are still in school. And I was saying, if this one thing does end up happening and our governor doesn't do this, and I said, we're yanking them out immediately today in this process. And we're just kind of, because where we're at, so far so good, but we're monitoring it pretty heavily. And the governor did step up, and he did some things. And I told my wife, and I said, we're running out of time. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, we're going to have to get a plan together, because our youngest would definitely, he'll never survive in this system. We're going to have to get something worked out, because one day we won't have this governor. We'll have somebody else. And the problem is, you can get somebody to come in and change everything that has already been established. And this is the problem that we have, that when we become lazy as leaders in our own communities, and we allow an individual to represent us, but we don't represent ourselves to those individuals, we create this magnitude of issues that, like you say, it's been happening for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And we're just now getting caught up to a lot of this information. I think a lot of times people fail to remember, I hear the terminology democracy, we live under a democracy, but we live under a constitutional republic, which means the people have more power than the elected officials. But whereas a democracy would mean that the elected official has more power over the people. And that's how a lot of people, especially those in socialism, are wanting that to happen. No doubt about that whatsoever. But this is why it's so important. And I want to encourage everyone that's listening or watching this episode that you got to get connected to what Landon and them are doing, and so many others are doing to fight for our children. So in that, Landon, you guys have, I know you have Freedom Forever. Give me a little bit more clarity for those that are listening to know, what is Freedom Forever doing?
Absolutely. Well, freedomforever.us is the website. That's my nonprofit. And number one, it's a volunteer-run organization. I don't take a salary, and nobody takes a salary. We are a group of concerned citizens, moms and dads, some dads, and we come together and we use our different skill sets to fill needs. And really, we're a national organization because we respond to so many national issues as well as local issues. But we respond to crisis, we support families, but we educate, we inform, and we equip people to do effective activism in the community, whether it's training them on how to get books removed or to confront their libraries, the whole step-by-step process, educating on this whole process of why this is happening in communities and how people can make a difference, what alternative choices there are, how to safeguard kids online, how to understand, the nature of exploitation online and what sexual exploitation in our culture does, how to safeguard our communities, that whole process. So it's legislative. It's also at the individual level, supporting families in crisis, families where they don't have anywhere else to go for resources, for recommendations. We're also building a map of all of the laws, all of the policies in our country, so people can see what states, what gaps there are. In the state of Tennessee, I talked about this at the rally, and this is really important for people to know. Our organization, we do a lot of investigative work. We originally exposed Vanderbilt's pediatric transgender clinic in July. And we also recently exposed a doctor in Nashville that was using the healthy naked breasts of a 15-year-old girl pre-op. It's bad enough, the post-op photos, but not blurred out, nothing. Just the naked photo of 15-year-old girl's breasts to advertise his female to male or male to female transgender services. That is exploitation. And you and I would think that's got to be illegal. We're in Tennessee, that's illegal, but it's not. And until we start paying attention and demanding and saying, hey, this is a problem. And we got it down just by organizing an activist movement. And that's the nature of Freedom Forever. We have that organized ability to get people together and put pressure. So immediately we got the photo pulled, right? But this needs to be a policy. This needs to be a law. This needs to be added to include, child sexual abuse material. Also needs to include lewd images that aren't even necessarily used for sexual purposes, quote unquote. And that's entirely subjective. But it's exploitive in nature because he's using that photo to solicit business. So these are laws that have to get done. My husband and I worked on the CPR Act. It's a cluster bill that just outlines all of the changes that we see. And so if you find it valuable, you can check it out on my link tree and my socials and add your name to it. We're going to be putting out a call to get people's name added to this so that we can hand this over to legislators and say, hey, these are the things that we demand in our communities. We're not okay with the all ages drag shows where children are exploited to sexual content or exposed to sexual content. We're not okay with the pornography in schools, with teachers telling our children to keep secrets and putting these books, these pornographic books, hiding them in the classroom in secret little, libraries within libraries in the school to bypass some of the other pushback. We're identifying all of these gaps, all of these holes where this stuff seeps in to our communities, and we're going to stop it. And so that is the work we do, and so much more. But we would love for people to get involved. We have volunteer opportunities and donation opportunities so that we can sustain the efforts, because a lot of this does require, website work, activism work, handouts, materials, supporting families in crisis and things to that effect.
Okay. I do got to go back to this just really, really quickly. This one got past me. I did not see the information. I was keeping up with the Vanderbilt stuff there, but the whole doctor using the bare images of a 15-year-old girl for his business in that, how did that fall into the category of not being illegal? Because if I were to take that same scenario and email it to somebody or to send it in a text message and stuff, that could be child pornography. I'm just curious, do you know why that didn't fall into not being against the law?
Yes. So, and if people want to watch the whole arc of how I discovered that process, I made a video on it on my socials. But I spent the day talking with law enforcement, the precinct, talking to ICAC detectives, that's Internet Crimes Against Children. I heard from the DA, didn't hear from him directly, but he reported to the ICAC detectives, to the police. So I was able to verify that. The FBI didn't even get back to me. So clearly they don't care. This is not just a state problem. This is a federal problem. But it's definitely important at a state level we act, and we have much better chances of getting that done in the state than tackling the federal issue. So state first, for sure. But yes, this is apparently legal in the state because it's not, this is how it was explained to me, not being used to solicit sexual activity or for sexual purposes. So, and this is the thing that doesn't make any sense. I'm very familiar with Tennessee code regarding obscenity, solicitation, exploitation. I mean, I deal with this every day. So I was shocked, and that's saying a lot. I see a lot. I was shocked to hear these people say that. And you know what? It's not law enforcement's fault. So, I want to put that out there. They're upset by this. They can't act though. This is why politics matters. I mean, it matters being involved, because then you have the people that are not paying attention to this stuff or not foreseeing it, not taking that preemptive action. We're always on defense. You ever wonder why that is? We're always responding to a crisis, and the left did this and they did this. It's because we're not planning. It's like in a football game. There's no game plan. It's just responding to crisis. And what gets decided, what crisis gets responded to, is based on how much public outcry there is over an issue, because it's just mitigation of, I don't want to lose voters. They're going to be upset with me if I don't do something about this. That's how this works. Yeah. So that's why, we have to coordinate efforts like this to push back. I mean, look at what Matt Walsh did, when he put pressure on them saying, nope, we're not going to let this happen. And all those people, we rallied together. Guess who showed up? So that's how this works. And we have so much more power than we think we do, especially as Christians. And we have the power that we need. We have the fearlessness we need. We just have to step into it.
I got to go back and watch that because that one got by me. And I'm just baffled by that because does it, fit within the law of being for a sexual use? I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm a lot older than what I realize a lot of times, because when you said that, I immediately think that sounds like a Bill Clinton law. Define is or it, and I'm like, it's still used in a sexual content. I'm just blown away by that one. That one
right. And that's why we have to update the code, because even if it's not used for sexual content, the fact that it's uploaded to an online marketplace to be used for profit, that's exploitation. That's exploiting a child for business, the nude photographs. And if you can do that legally, what else do you think that they can get away with?
Landon, I sit here and I want to look at some of these people and go, how stupid do you think I am? I mean, realistically, the Victoria's Secret and the Sears catalog and all that was used for sexual purposes back in the day before the internet and all that stuff. So the whole idea around that is just that type of litigation in the political realm is what really frustrates me, because it's just uncalled for. And I could go on and have a multitude of conversations with you on this stuff to get this information out. But I always, first of all, I want to respect the time that I have my guest. And one of the things I always try to do is give each guest an opportunity to have the final word, that last thought. Maybe there was a question I didn't get to. Maybe there was something that you wanted to share and we just didn't get to share it. Maybe we covered everything and there's nothing left to share. But if there is, I want to give you that final thought.
Thank you. I think that I'll share something that maybe will inspire some people. And I've thought a lot about this, is that, what we think a lot about what God wants, but still there's some disconnect. What does the enemy want? The enemy wants us to sit and just pray and not act, not pray with our feet. They want us to not get involved. They want us to trust strangers with our children, to spend less time with our children. They want us to fear parenting and discipline and those healthy boundaries. They want us to step into the world and be afraid of uncomfortable conversations. The enemy wants us to not act on anything, because he can't get the agenda he wants done in this world if we're in the way, if we're creating roadblocks, if we are joining other people, in protest and using our First Amendment. He can't get what he needs done. We're a problem then. So he needs to convince us that we don't need to get involved, that it's the unchristian thing to do to not get involved, that, we're just all creating a hoopla and chaos and, we're viewing images we shouldn't view that is bad for us. No, children are viewing those images. We need to pay attention to what children are exposed to. The enemy wants us to do nothing. The enemy wants us just to sit back and talk about all the sex trafficking, go, oh my gosh, that's so bad. Yes, it's so bad. And that's it. That's the end of it. That's what we do about it. And I'm not big enough. I'm this small. I'm not big enough to make a difference, or somebody else will do it. They're more well-spoken. They're more connected. They have what it takes to do it. The enemy wants to convince us to play small and to not walk in the authority that we are called to walk in. God wants us to step into that authority. God wants us to be powerful. He gave us that power to speak truth, to share the gospel, to share truth with people. And if we are living in fear, the enemy wins. So sometimes we have to think about not just what does God want, but what does the enemy want? Because we have to counteract what he's trying to do in this world, because this isn't God's world. This is a fallen world. And we are called to be here to fight for it and fight for the souls of people.
So good, Landon. Just so good. All right. So here's the thing. Again, I want to remind everybody to connect with the work that they're doing is freedomforever.us. And you're seeing that on the screen for those that are watching. But also, if you want to learn more about Landon and just some other things and events and information and stuff, her website, landonstarbuck.com. And that website as well has also your social media links as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So is there any other way that people can connect with you that I'm just not recalling at this moment?
I think all the links should be available there. I'm very active on Instagram more so, but I also am on Twitter and Truth. But I put out a lot of video content, a lot of educational content that can catch people up to speed with, why we're here and what we can do. And there's always a fight. There's always something that we need your help with. So we want people to join our army fighting for kids.
Yeah. And listen, I know a lot of times I have guests on here and I'll say, connect with them, follow them, or buy their book, whatever the case may be. I'm pleading with some of you parents out there to get connected to what is happening in your communities. Even if you don't see the things that maybe in the bigger cities, there's a high probability it's probably happening in your region. You're just not made aware of it at this moment. And these individuals such as Landon and her husband and what they're doing is amazing, but you've still got to step up and get involved. And so I'm pleading with you, get involved, do something, really educate yourself, know your representatives, know your senators, know your governors, go know your local politicians as well. And most importantly, get to know the law of the land. I mean, I was shocked about that just a moment ago. It never registered with me that something like that would be even possible. So, Landon, thank you so much for being a part of the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It really has blessed me greatly to have you on.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for having me on. I'm happy to come on anytime. And thank you to your listeners for listening to this conversation.
Absolutely. And for everyone else, I genuinely hope and pray that this episode has challenged you, it has equipped you, and it has encouraged you to know what to do, to be able to combat the agenda of darkness, because the kingdom assignment is greater. Light is greater than darkness, but we still have a work to do. Don't wait on someone else to do it. Rise up in this hour and do what you are called to do. If not for yourself, at least for your children and your grandchildren and your grandchildren's children, because we got a generation and generations to fight for. Share this information, share the content, share the video, share the episode, share it on all social media accounts. We encourage you to like, rate, review, leave us a comment, let us know, connect with Landon and her husband and what they're doing and everything. We genuinely hope and pray that you are blessed and know that you are loved, because we love you in the name of Jesus.
Thank you for listening to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It is our prayer that this episode challenged you, encouraged you, and equipped you for the advancement of the kingdom of God. For more episodes or ways that you can partner with Ryan Johnson Ministries, please go to www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. Please join us again soon for another episode of the Blacksmith Chronicles.